Hey y'all, Fritz here with a little prologue for the episode today. My guest, author Joe Kelly, was kind enough to come over to our house and cook us a meal that, as an anti-fascist, I found both nourishing and complex. Joe and I are indeed at odds on the question of liberalism and subjects like the Founding Fathers and electoralism, but I was very happy to have him, and he's assembled a story that has at least as many lessons for today's liberals as it does for listeners coming from anarchist, socialist, communist, and other radical wings of the anti-fascist struggle. I'm sure you'll get as much out of his work as I did, and I'm grateful for the quality of ammunition that he's assembled here for the ongoing battle against the fash. Enjoy.
Be sure it's true when you say, I love you. It's a sin to tell a lie. Billions of hearts have been broken, yes, yes. Just because these words were spoken. You know the words that were spoken? Here it is. It's a sin to tell a lie. Now get on out there and tell your lie. What is it?
Hello there, listeners. My name is Fritz McLinden, and this is The State Between Us. My guest today is Joseph Kelly, Director of Irish and Irish American Studies at South Carolina's oldest university, the College of Charleston, and author of the new book, The Biggest Lie, The Prehistory of American Fascism, 1818 to 1915. So longtime listeners of this show should not be surprised that I jumped at the chance to talk to him today. This show, The State Between Us, has had many topics, but the one enduring theme that ties most of our episodes together here is that of American fascism and its many expressions and many points of origin. I've done episodes on the idea of the American race growing out of the death of Reconstruction and the conquest of the West. I've done some on the National Association of Manufacturers and how they gave us goons like Robert Welch of the John Birch Society and Tim LaHaye of the Council for National Policy. We've talked about the China lobby and the birth of the American right with all its nasty ties to the World Anti-Communist League of reactionaries, Nazis, and conservatives, the unsavory history of WASP power and what that might say about the post-Trump right, and many, many more. But I've always worked in pieces. I've always had one topic at a time. Surely, I would say to myself, staring out the window and watching the rain evaporate off of the sidewalk, that there just can't be one single book out there that can offer me a sweeping history that weaves together all the most important precedents to American fascism in one easy-to-read narrative. Surely not. Well, listener, I could not have been more wrong. Joseph Kelly's book, The Biggest Lie, released by Bloomsbury Press just a couple of weeks ago, tells the long and violent tale of the idea of natural inequality in the United States. He shows how, despite their kind of disgusting hypocrisy on the matter, those high-minded slave owners, we Americans like to call the Founding Fathers, fundamentally, in fact, did intend their War of Independence to be the death knell for slavery. And the assumption that democracy would inevitably prevail over the wicked institution was not only widespread among the ruling class at the time, it was practically ubiquitous. So what happened? Joe shows how the project of inequality was an intentional one, a reactionary network of propagandists, of so-called scientists, of lawmakers, plantation owners, and of course, ultra-violent death squads working together to launch a century-long counter-revolution against the very notion of a common humanity, and how the decorous claims of reformers, abolitionists, and progressives repeatedly failed to stop it. This is a story of the heinous violence and the devil's bargains that empowered the proto-fascist elements of the United States to ultimately define what it meant to be American, and to set us up for what we on this show like to call the Amerifash, the endemic fascist tendencies in U.S. political and social life that a lot of people would like to pretend we don't have, maybe never had. But also, I should say that Joe tells stories of resistance, of resistors, be they radicals, reformers, or just, decent people who stood up at the right time. It's a sweeping text. There's a lot to learn in it, and I definitely recommend it to my listeners. Joseph Kelly is also the author of Marooned, The Jamestown Shipwreck, and A New History of America's Origin that was published in 2018, as well as America's Longest Siege, Charleston, Slavery, and the Slow March Toward Civil War from 2013. Links to all of these will be in the description of the episode on patreon.com/thestatebetweenus. So, without further ado, to help us make sense of this mess we call America, I am thrilled to introduce to my listeners Joseph Kelly. So, Joe, why don't you say hi, and maybe you can kick this off by telling us why you undertook this impressive project, this prehistory of American fascism.
Yeah, thanks, Fritz, and thanks very much for the opportunity to talk to your audience. It's great to be able to talk to an audience that is pretty well informed about these things and not just skim the surface in an interview. So,
they're huge nerds, Joe. They're huge nerds.
Yes, I like that. Yeah, that's terrific. How did I come to do this? Well, after the last book, Marooned, which was new territory for me, took a ton of research, into the 17th century to do that, which was very much outside of my field. I wanted to do something that was closer to home, and I'm originally trained as a literary critic. My first book was on James Joyce.
That's right.
I worked in
I saw that.
1920s, 1930s. I thought, okay, I'm going to keep doing this kind of historical narrative. I'm going to write about democracy, but I'm going to do it in my wheelhouse, which is the 1920s and the 1930s. So I won't have to do as much background research. And of course, this is kind of coinciding with the rise of Donald Trump. He triggered all that entire body of work that I think is summed up by Madeleine Albright's Fascism: A Warning. We all of a sudden, American intellectuals became very fascinated by fascism and started churning out books, and almost all those books were warning us about what direction we're headed in. And this is now almost 10 years of this, right? So those books influenced me very much, and I decided, well, let me go back to the 1920s, 1930s. I'm going to write a book about the establishment of liberal democracy. What I was really fascinated by was those institutions, the constitutions of knowledge, as Jonathan Rauch would call it, that in a massive society of hundreds of millions of people, these are the things that actually make consent of the governed meaningful. How does a society that large actually discern what's true, what's not, and therefore what's good policy, what's not policy, and what's justice? And those institutions are academia. Academic freedom was established as was regularized, was professionalized in the early 20th century. Journalism, the code of ethics gets codified. I think 1923 is the first time it's professionalized with the rubric "seek truth and report it."
Right. So it takes like 100 years for them to just stop making shit up just because they want to, right?
Yeah. Of course. Yeah, and it's the same. The courts. This is about the time. There's an important case in the mid 1920s dealing with the Elaine massacre in Arkansas. Right. That puts the federal government back into a supervisory role over the Jim Crow courts that obviously were not about seeking truth or establishing or executing justice. They were about maintaining a caste system. Right. So all these institutions are established. They're really only about 100 years old. We like to think of the guardrails of democracy as being 250 years old, but most of them are not. And those are the things that were getting eroded under MAGA and Donald Trump. So I wanted to write a book about the clash in the 20s and 30s, how these institutions got established and their fight against the fascist elements in American history. So the first chapter was going to set the stage and try to persuade readers, there really was a threat that we were going to become a fascist nation. We're already well on the way. The main narrative of American identity was Anglo-Saxon empire.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So Birth of the Nation, was going to be the starting point for this book. And so I started writing that chapter, and I found myself writing backwards rather than forwards.
Oh man, I feel you so much right now. Like that's the constant problem on this show, research-wise, is that there's always something before it.
Yes, exactly right. And I think it might be a character flaw of my own in particular as well, and a cause of great anxiety until I confessed to my editor at Bloomsbury what I was doing. But he thought it was great. He was on board and encouraged me.
Good.
But I started, I was tugging on what are the roots of American fascism, and what I discovered is that as I pulled this up out of the ground, this sort of subterranean history, and I'm tugging and following it. It's like a vine, rather than going straight down, I'm going back.
Uh-huh.
And it's not leading to Mussolini, and it's not leading to Germany. It's leading to the American South. I'll give you an example. Teddy Roosevelt. I know your listeners know a lot about Teddy Roosevelt.
We've talked about Ted. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, where did he get his white supremacist ideas? He really got them from his mother and his grandmother and a couple aunts that were living in their New York townhouse, who were from the South,
right?
And they told him stories from the South, and he talks about this in his autobiography that these were his pirates and his monsters, and the myths that he grew up on were myths of the antebellum South.
Yeah, he had that you mentioned in the book. He was surrounded not only by stories like Confederate hagiographies, but also Confederate veterans. No.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Uncles who had these, very romantic to the view of a child and exciting careers in the losing cause, while his dad dodged the draft.
Yes.
So as a kid, where's your imagination going to go? And this is one kind of thing that I'm really interested in is the formation of that kind of imagination. And when it's that imagination gets formed in a figure like Teddy Roosevelt, it's obviously hugely consequential for the rest of us. So that it's leading back down to the South, and I kept tugging on this, the roots, and it took me further and further back. In a way, I had to check myself, because I've written on the American South before. America's Longest Siege is about the evolution of slave ideology, mm-hmm. From the 17th century up to the Civil War. So this was familiar territory. I was a little suspicious that I was holding a hammer and everything looked like a nail, but I became more and more convinced that was not the case, and I also started running across historians of fascism making aside references to the resemblance between certain aspects of Nazi Germany and the Jim Crow South, and they're beginning to pay much more attention to it now, I think. But Jacob Stanley and How Does Fascism Work makes kind of an aside reference. Well, this looks a lot like what was happening in the South, and even Robert O. Paxton suggests that the first emergence of the Klan in the early 1870s had very fascistic tendencies, but they hadn't really followed up on this. And then there's the whole concept of Herrenvolk democracy, which kind of dominates Southern studies from the 1970s through the 80s and 90s. So there's hints of it, but no one has really, I don't think, accused the American South as inventing fascism, and that's really kind of where I ended up. I kind of persuaded myself that that's what was happening. We first in the antebellum South, beginning in 1818, I think there's a significant shift in the national narrative in 1818, especially in the South, and from then on, we kind of incubate a competing type of nationalism. And to sum it up, I mean, it comes down to, as Heather Cox Richardson says in her really kind of fascinating book, how the South won the Civil War. Mm-hmm. Those who believe in all men are created equal, and those who do not believe in all men are created equal. And 1818 is when the narrative that all men are not created equal starts getting traction. We've had a couple generations that are swept up, I think, in the revolutionary fervor and the revolutionary ideology of the 1770s. And when we get to 1818, as the debate over Missouri, is Missouri going to enter the country as a free state or a slave state, that triggers further arguments about how, okay, if we're going to get rid of slavery, we really need to start doing something about it. And that's what frightens the planters. Mm-hmm. And so that's, you talked about a counter-revolution. I wish I'd used that term in the book. That's a great way to think about it.
Second edition, Joe.
Yes, right. No, the second edition is going to be that first book that I was supposed to write.
Yeah.
So and the planters start consciously weaving a new narrative. And that narrative is that at the founding, when they said all men are created equal, what they really meant was all men are not created equal.
Yes.
Yes. And I'm glad you're laughing at that, because it is laughable, right? I mean, it is an absurd claim. And it's made by a senator from South Carolina in 1820, a guy named William Smith, who kind of grew up in the neighborhood of Andrew Jackson. May or may not have known him as a kid. He was a couple of years older than Jackson, but was still, he was an adolescent during the Revolution, and he rises up after the Revolution. The upstate of South Carolina is booming, all these land claims and everything, and he's a lawyer, so he makes a ton of money, becomes very influential in South Carolina politics. Although everybody hates him, he's kind of a jerk.
Yeah, he's a huge asshole, this guy. Yeah.
Yes.
And he also, tell me if I'm wrong, but doesn't he start his kind of appeal for slavery against like the mollifiers and abolitionists even before 1818? Like I think I had 1790 written down. Like he's early to this, no?
Well,
pioneering.
This confuses historians to no end. There's two William Smiths from South Carolina.
Oh God. Okay.
Who both do this.
I'm thinking of William Lawton Smith, I guess.
Yes. Okay. Who in the First Continental Congress, there's an argument about whether the federal government can regulate tariffs on slaves, because of course, the slave trade is allowed until 1808. The only state that's doing it is Georgia. Even South Carolina recognizes the inhumanity of the slave trade, of the transatlantic slave trade
for now.
And then it changes, and it changes because of the second William Smith is very instrumental in 1803 in getting it reversed. So the last couple of years, but even when he does that, he has to get he very quickly gets the legislature to approve it, and then the legislature sees what they've done in 1804, and they start trying to repeal their allowance of the slave trade in South Carolina, and he's instrumental in preventing it. But even so, it comes down to one vote in the Senate, in the South Carolina Senate. So it was very close to, even in South Carolina, recognizing in the legislature and against the moneyed interests of the South Carolina economy, that the evils of slavery. Because the narrative from 1776 is the narrative that was established in the first draft of the Declaration of Independence, right, is that slavery is an inherited evil.
Yeah, it was very specific, right? It called it out, and then they had to, I guess, be polite to their fellow rulers of men,
Yeah, and just to get a little deeper into this for anybody who doesn't know, what we're talking about is the last grievance that Jefferson wrote in the draft of the Declaration of Independence, which called out King George for, going across the sea and kidnapping people who never offended him and dragging them through the Middle Passage, where many of them die, and then enslaving them here. And he calls it a crime against nature. That's a paraphrase. I don't think he uses the word crime, but he does say against nature, against human nature. So it's very clear in the Declaration of Independence, the first draft, which Benjamin Franklin and John Adams and Thomas Jefferson bring to Congress, that they consider slavery an inherited evil, and that it's inimical to the Republican ideals of the new country. And at the same time, too, I might point out, Jefferson very carefully calls the people who are dragged over here from Africa, he calls them men, and it's in his handwriting, all capitalized, capital M, capital E,
just N. Like the phrase "all men are created equal." The intention is clear there. Yeah.
It's absolutely clear. Mm-hmm. Now, this does not mean that Jefferson thought white people and black people were the same. I mean, he believed in essential differences between the races. Most people in America did. They didn't understand then that race was an invented category. It's a social concept. There's no basis in biology for the category of race. They did not have, biological evidence for the universality of the human species. But in the Enlightenment, they believed in it fundamentally. So the differences, Jefferson thought black people were better musicians than white people.
Yes.
He thought they were worse composers. And of course, that corresponds exactly to the prejudice underneath that, which is that black people are more primitive than white people. So if you're more primitive, you're going to understand rhythm in your body better than white people are, right? You're going to be a better dancer.
If
right?
we spend too much time on Jefferson, I'm gonna start getting angry.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll get away from. Yeah, you're gonna. I know we have some disagreement about this, but I'll tell you one of my reasons for dealing with Jefferson the way I do in the book is I think it's a very important tactical error for the left in the United States to abandon the founding fathers and make leave the founding fathers as a patriotic symbol for the right in America. I think that's by doing that, I think we lose the game.
I think there's an argument for that. There's because if you're thinking tactically, like, of course, I mean, this book is really good at explaining exactly how the right was able to create. Well, I mean, you titled it, the title of the book, The Biggest Lie, which is that these ideals were instead held up in a sort of mirror version, while still claiming to be the truth behind the ideal. So, I mean, tactically speaking, there's a lot in this book that can be thrown at the conservative and fascist right in the U.S. And I think that's true. I think that was a good move here that you made.
Yeah, and they definitely. So, to get back to 1818, then they,
exactly.
Those folks in 1818, William Smith, he's considered a crackpot when he gives a speech in 1820. But he plants the seed, and of course, he and his ilk have a lot to work with. I mean, they can look at Jefferson's notes on the state of Virginia, and they can pull passages out and say clearly, he did not believe in equality, and they can point to the fact that the Constitution did not abolish slavery, knowing full well all the time that the reason we didn't write equality into the Constitution in 1787 was because of the influence of South Carolina, Georgia, and North Carolina.
Yes. Yes.
So he's he rewrites that not as a concession made by the rest of the states that they'd rather not do, but as this is the ideology of the whole nation. So that very quickly, I mean, it's very helpful, economically to the planters, and especially we're at this time, Mississippi and Alabama are opening up, and the new cotton plantation land is being gobbled up, and people on the East Coast are dragging their slave gangs out there to make tons of money in cotton. So there's big moneyed interests that this narrative serves really, really well because it's going to prevent the rest of the country from really getting on the emancipation bandwagon, right? So, and then it gets, I look at the supposed Denmark Vesey slave insurrection in 1822 in Charleston and the Nat Turner insurrection in Virginia, and these play into what becomes the narrative of the American South,
right?
Which is that Black people are inherently unruly. They cannot. They're too primitive to participate in self-government. So we can't. I mean, when we say all men have been endowed by the Creator with the right to consent to their government, and if their government is abrogating their rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, they have the right to overthrow it and establish a new one. That doesn't apply to Black people, because if you give Black people license, they're going to slit your throat and they're going to rape your wife.
Right. And just to put a fine point on it, to prove how very civilized they are, after Nat Turner's rebellion, there is just a period of nonstop pogroms, massacres, brutality,
hundreds
on
of
the
innocent
part of the Southerners. Yeah.
Innocent Black people. When I say innocent, I mean people had nothing to do with the Nat Turner rebellion. Not to say, make a statement one way or the other on the guilt or innocence of the rebels themselves.
In fact, that term kind of loses its meaning in the South because they don't give a shit either. Like they're perfectly willing not only to do these mass murders, but then later we'll see them straight up lying about them. Like it's really some sleazy shit,
Yeah.
And that's but I don't want to lose sight of one thing though, that we are talking right now about the whiteness defining itself against Blackness, but that wasn't the only source of reflection that was contributing to whiteness. You also talk about the frontier in this time. And the kind of Jacksonian, well, this is a bit later. I mean, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but there's also the relationship between whiteness and indigeneity. that comes out of frontier battles and stuff like that. So maybe that can just be in the background for listeners. But,
yeah. No, I think that's an important part because, so far I've been talking about, elite culture.
Yeah, exactly.
The planters and the elite class, the preachers, the college professors, and those folks in the South who, and at first it's a clique of these, newspaper editors are all on board with all men are created equal, even as late as the Nat Turner Rebellion and the debate in Virginia that's resulted from that, which triggers this, we've got to get on the road to emancipation. That's still sort of the mainstream narrative being told as late as that. So there are certain elites who are still on board with the notion that we are stealing God-given rights from Black people, and we got to stop doing it, because God's justice can't sleep forever, right? That ringing phrase that, well, I'll leave Jefferson out of it. But it is, it begins with this elite group, and this is something else, a very kind of prominent theme in the book. I talk about sort of the invention of American anthropology is just designed to back up this notion that Black people are so primitive that they don't have these rights that other people have, that white people have, right?
Yeah, as somebody, I actually finished anthropology. I was an anthropologist for a while, and you learn about this stuff, you do, but like this book is a reckoning on American anthropology, and that's much appreciated.
Yeah, great. Well, coming from an anthropologist, I prize that comment.
Well, an anarchist anthropologist, so I'm going to be prone to,
right. There may be some others, but I don't think any anthropologists today are going to be, trying to claim Josiah Knott or something from South Carolina in the 1850s. But besides the elite, there's of course, they have the problem, and they talk about, Duff Green talks about this in his letters, like, how are we going to get everyone else on board? Because everybody's talking about slavery as an evil, right. And that's the narrative in the pulpit, in the 1820s, and how are we going to change everybody's mind? They're actually talking about it like this. So I think, along with this sort of propaganda campaign that's going on, like at William and Mary, at what becomes the University of South Carolina, and certain newspaper editors, certain politicians, the John C. Calhouns and that kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
But there's the experience of what historians have called the plain folk of the Old South, mm-hmm. which are in the 1820s, 1830s. 3% of white people in the South were involved in the plantation economy. Directly involved in the plantation economy. That makes sense.
It's a class-based system.
Yes, very, very class-based. Only 25% of whites own a slave, even one slave, one domestic who's cleaning the house or something like that. If we go down to that level, 3/4 of the white people
they weren't invested.
They're not invested. As a matter of fact, they're anti-invested because they know that the more money that the planters get, that hurts their own interests.
Right.
Because the factions really, it's a, planters who are perceived as aristocrats versus the plain folk, the regular people. Before he became a planter, the Andrew Jacksons of the frontier.
Mm-hmm.
So their experience, and we're talking in generalities here, but the frontier, there's a cultural difference. The original settlers on the coast in the South were predominantly English. The settlers in the backcountry are predominantly Scots-Irish.
Which is very interesting because this also ties back to the colonization of Ireland too. And these people's ancestry, as I understood it from the book, they draw their lineage to settlers in Ireland.
Yes. Yeah.
It's
exactly
an unbroken
right.
line. It's very interesting.
Settlers who displaced what were called the native Irish,
right.
Stole their land, some of them as recompense for being the soldiers who actually did the stealing, and some of them in organized operations, these big capitalist operations where they would, bring dozens of people and plant an entire town with they would just establish the farm overnight almost, there would be a whole community planting. That our word plantation comes from the colonization of Ireland.
Uh-huh.
So this is a class of people who are used to doing this. Now, of course, in Ireland, they're probably, like Andrew Jackson's parents who came from Antrim, County Antrim. They probably weren't thinking too much about how their ancestors had kicked the native Irish off the land, but nevertheless, they were part of this operation for generations. They get to America, and the reason they go, of course, is because they're second-class citizens in Ireland because they're not part of the established church. They're Presbyterians, so they're dissenters. The native Irish are third class. They're second class. It's the Anglicans, the Church of Ireland folks, who are have most rights in Ireland.
That's right.
So whenever economic times turn bad, these Scots-Irish are suffering, and so that's why we have these waves of immigration in the 18th century. And the lands along the seaboard have been settled already. So they'll, typically come in at Philadelphia and they'll go west until they kind of reach the mountains, and then they go south on what was called the Great Wagon Road, and they populate, they end up settling what is essentially either recently vacated or not even vacated Indian territory out in the backcountry of the South. And that's where, the stereotypes that we have of Appalachia now derive from this ethnic group, the Scots-Irish, the Presbyterians, who settled the frontier country. And when someone like Andrew Jackson's family settles in the Waxhaw region, which is right on the border between South Carolina and North Carolina, near where Charlotte is today, there are almost no Black people at all. I mean, none of these frontier settlers, they don't own slaves. Maybe the richest of them might own one or something, but it's very unusual. Their understanding of whiteness does not come from that white-black contrast that you have on the East Coast.
But it comes from battle, though. It comes from battle. Combat.
Yeah, because there's obvious conflict with Native Americans, the various tribes that are getting displaced, and that gets becomes more acute during the Revolution. Where certain tribes, see, this is our chance. We'll align ourselves with the British. They'll give us some guns. Maybe we'll win out, and we could drive those settlers back.
Yeah, with the French.
Davy Crockett's parents get killed this way.
Right.
Out on the frontier between North Carolina and Tennessee. So their experience. I mean, this is race war, right?
Yes.
They are getting killed for being white, and then they go kill people because they're Indians, and so it is very much, very acute racial sensibility. But even so, I mean, their recognition in this warfare with Native Americans, they don't even when they're disparaging Native Americans and complaining about their savagery and primitiveness, they never believe that they don't have the capacity for self-governance, because they're obviously very well organized, and they're really good fighters, and they're a dangerous enemy. So even when we get, when Andrew Jackson becomes president, and we get the policy of removal, this ethnic cleansing that takes place in the 1830s, the idea is these two races can't live together, but we don't think that you guys don't have the God-given right to self-determination. We're just going to make you do it in Oklahoma.
There was something, I think, very something deeper about this relationship that went on too. I'm thinking about Andrew Jackson as well. Like, you rightly call it a betrayal, right? Like there are, I guess, promises made, or at least the certain intentions laid out. But the thing is it's very clear once the rubber meets the road that these people that are now seeing themselves as whites in some way don't feel any obligation, and there's no moral obligation. Like you would have with another Scotch-Irish guy, whatever. Like, that's not even.
Yes. Yeah. And this, of course, is, culminating in the War of 1812, where, Andrew Jackson is, basically carrying on a fight against hostile Indians west of Appalachia. But his greatest allies are other Native Americans. Right. And so it is kind of a civil war going on among the Indians themselves. And one of those sides allies with him and the United States government in putting down what is essentially a rebellion against the rule of the Native American tribes.
Right.
They're siding with the British, and they're thinking this is our opportunity to push white people back across the mountains. So there's a rebellion among the Native American tribes themselves, and so a civil war, if you will. So there's two sides there, and he has these allies, and they help him win crucial battles. The Battle of Horseshoe Bend, which really wins the war, is really won by his Native American allies who swim across the river and attack the enemy in the rear. He couldn't have done it without his allies.
Right.
And by the way, Davy Crockett's a foot soldier in this whole thing, and he writes about it in his own memoir. So we have an interesting contrast, I think, that I bring out in the book between Andrew Jackson and Davy Crockett. So Andrew Jackson at the end, he absolutely believes in the humanity of Native Americans. He actually adopts the child of at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend.
He does, but he does also kind of use him as like a token, like this is
absolutely.
I'm not racist. I have a brown baby. Like it's,
Yes, I know. But to do that, I mean, here's the important thing about Andrew Jackson. I think to do that, he recognizes humanity, and he's actually thinking about sending the kid to West Point. So he doesn't think that there's anything inherent in being a Native American.
There's not a biological argument yet, right? There's just
which
this
makes
idea
the betrayal.
Go on, please.
Yeah, it makes the betrayal even more insidious, right?
Yeah.
Because this is not based on a belief that Native Americans are incapable of self-government or participation in democracy. It's just a land grab.
Yeah.
So he writes up the terms of not of a treaty, he calls it the capitulation, right? So his Indian allies have to sign a capitulation, which opens up, hundreds of thousands square miles of territory for white settlers, and that's why we get those cotton farmers coming from South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia. They go, oh well, let's keep the slaves. Let's not move towards emancipation, because all of a sudden we've got all these lands opened up and we can make a killing in the next 2 generations. Yes, but so he stabs those folks in the back, and it's a real stab in the back.
It's crazy, Joe, that we're only in 1820 at this point or something, and we already have Herrenvolk and Lebensraum in the story.
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely. So this was what was fascinating to me. I'm thinking, God, this is exactly the same thing that we see. Plus, as you mentioned, the death squads, the extrajudicial violence, the vigilante committees that are roaming around the South. And this is an important point that very few people make, I think. And we really need to remember this about the antebellum South. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, it was horrible for the Cherokee, right? And obviously, it was horrible for the enslaved Black people. It was horrible for free people of color in the South. Mm-hmm. We all know that. Nobody deviates from that. But we forget what the experience was like for white people in the South. After 1835, the summer of 1835 is another one of those crucial moments. And after the summer of 1835, dissent is impossible in the South. If you preach, as some people do, as they preach at revival meetings in the summer of 1835, all men are created equal, you will get hunted down and lynched. And if you're lucky, you'll escape and get across the river and live in exile in Illinois.
Do you know who does remember that, Joe? Is American neo-Nazis did. I mean, the Turner Diaries of William Luther Pierce. There's a very famous chapter in it called "The Day of the Rope," and that's not about lynching people of color. That's about lynching white people, especially women. Who, they didn't forget this. We forgot this. Yeah, we forgot this. The Grimke sisters, the great abolitionists from my hometown of Charleston, South Carolina, after 1837 had to live in exile. A committee of people came to their parents' house and said if they come back, they're going to get lynched. So tell them not to come back. Mm-hmm. So anybody who deviated from what was originally a crackpot notion in 1820, 15 years later, if you deviate from that, you're risking your life. Right.
15 years. That's what it took. 15 years.
Amazing. Yeah.
And then after that, of course, everybody who grows up in the South is going to be indoctrinated into this ideology, and they're going to think this is the natural way of things. But it has to be enforced by violence, because it's a lie. If you look at things dispassionately through a scientific eye, you're going to discover Black people are the equal to white people. So you can't allow open debate, you can't allow open discussion, because ultimately the truth will out. And folks realize that. And then by the time you get to 1850, you've had an entire generation of people who have grown up being taught that this is nature, this is the natural way that, and all those crazy people who think black people are equal are idealists. They're not realists. They're not looking at the real evidence. So by 1850, the people who are promoting the notion of black inferiority and white supremacy are claiming to be the realists. It's amazing when you watch, the intellectual history that took place in the South. So the way I was thinking about it is what we're doing. I mean, we have a nation within a nation. Abraham Lincoln recognized this, right? A lot of people did. The Republican Party in the 1850s recognizes this. We have two different nationalisms at work in the United States, and they're diametrically opposed. One based on the notion that all men are created equal, which is why we see Lincoln quoting the Declaration so often, and the other on the principle that all men are not created equal. And then the Civil War ends up being the battle to decide which is it going to be. What kind of nation are we going to be? And of course, the Union wins, and we're supposed to have our new birth of freedom. And we do experiment for 10 years with a biracial republic, or I really should say a multiracial republic, because when we write equality into the Constitution in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, the 14th Amendment, contrary to what some Supreme Court justices have just said, it was very clearly applied to all races. So what was, the Civil War obviously was about slavery, but the victory over slavery then, made all other non-white peoples equal citizens according to the law.
Well, this might be a good time to read out a quote from your book here that you wrote, and I think this sums up this moment pretty well, which is that you wrote, "To white people, racial equality felt like black supremacy. Sharing power felt like impotence." So at this moment, we've got whiteness being, in my reading anyway, of your argument, whiteness is, in the South especially, but not just, is being defined as rule, or through the idea of rule. And you mention, and this is also, I think, a part of your book that's very important, which is that what is often called the libidinal core of anti-black racism, this obsession with black sexuality, black bodies, like impotence is the word you used here, I think, for a reason, right?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So we're talking post-Reconstruction here, or the overthrow of Reconstruction. And I think about it in terms that Ernst Renan laid out, and I think it was 1882 in that essay, "What is a Nation?" Where that sort of foundational essay about nationalisms, where he talked what binds people together, is a common history, common goal, and what really binds them together is common suffering. So whatever, and historians argue about the degree to which Southern culture was felt as a nationalism. Like, did Southerners feel they were part of a Southern nation? They argue about the degree to which that sentiment existed within the souls and brains of white people in the South before the war. After the war, the common suffering solidifies it, and nobody really challenges the notion that there is a sense of solidarity as a people who are set apart and different than other Americans. So Southerners after the war, and they really do suffer. I mean, they suffer horrible losses in the war, of course, brought on by themselves, but they do suffer losses. And then during Reconstruction, people who had been fabulously wealthy have lost their wealth. People who had run the county no longer run the county, because now we have a democratic election, and lo and behold, there's a majority of black people in this county. So the sheriff is now a black man. All of a sudden, black people can walk down the sidewalk and not have to get out of your way when you're walking down the sidewalk, and they're wearing nice clothes. No longer do we have the caste system imposed by the kind of dress you wear.
They're acting like they belong there, and that enrages these people.
Yes,
right.
Yeah, and this is really an important point about Reconstruction too. Eric Foner does this, and I think historians do a better job of that in the last 20 years or so. Reconstruction and the Civil War itself. I mean, these are not victories that were won and handed to Black people. I mean, Black people in the South, enslaved people, won their freedom.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
they did it themselves in partnership with white folks from the Union Army, and then they fight the battles. They do the hard lifting.
Yeah.
You know, there are heroic people who come down to man the freedmen's bureaus and stuff, but these victories are largely won by recently enslaved people.
And on the back end, too, of a century of rebellions, of learning tactics of resistance. I mean, this is, it's true. The Black agency has been very much robbed of this story.
Right. Yeah. That's changing now. I think people recognize Reconstruction is the work of Black people. But so in so much that it is, you know, that is hugely threatening to white people who have grown up in essentially, you know, the Southern version of the Hitler Youth, you know, where they I'm tempted to say that's too dramatic a way to put it, but it
not
really
for this
is.
show, Joe. No, go for it. You're go
all
on.
right with this crowd. I mean, it definitely was brainwashing. You know, if you were born in 1835, as Mark Twain was, for instance, you know, you grow up in a world where you are drummed into the big lie, white supremacy, Black inferiority. And you think anybody who deviates from that is a crackpot themselves. I mean, that's what has happened there. How could you be so crazy as to think Black people could have the vote or be a sheriff in the county or be a judge or be a representative in Congress? That's absurd.
You've got to remember that these are just simple farmers. These are people of the land, the common clay of the New West. You know, morons.
So white people, after the war, they experienced defeat as replacement.
Yeah.
Right. This is, the same replacement anxiety that's being invoked against immigrants in today's day. You know, the notion that Haitians are going to kidnap your pets and eat them. I mean, this is...
Yes, it's disgusting. I remember reading this. I was thinking like, it's impossible not to see the parallels between what, you know, Joe's written here and the contemporary period. But then I realized, like, no, I'm wrong. These aren't parallels. Parallels imply two lines. This is one line, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very good. Very good point. Yeah. So, I mean, this is a continuation of the same thing, which apparently is going to always be with us. I think history has proven that. What we need to do is be ready to deal with it. Right?
Yeah. I'm with you. In studies of European nationalism, there is a lot of hay made correctly about the story of defeat. Like you've already brought this up now, but the romance of being defeated is very important to European fascism and European nationalism. And you wrote here, I think, a really great line, and that is, so long as the southern states pretended to have lost the war, they could rebuild their civilization on the principle of inequality. That idea of them pretending, I think, is really important in this story.
Yeah. So, you know, the war gives them their mythic heroes. Yeah. Right. The lost cause, you know, having been defeated, but defeated in such an honorable way, and with such heroism and et cetera, et cetera. You know, that becomes the myth. But I say pretended to be defeated because in some ways, you know, we should think of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. This is essentially the peace treaty. Right. You know, if this is a war between two nations, between the United States and the Confederacy, the United States wins the war and says, the terms of peace is that you have to accept these amendments and you have to rewrite your constitution, your state constitutions, in compliance with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And after you do that, we will readmit you to the Union. Right. So they all do that, but then they end up, you know, not honoring the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments after 1876. I mean, they're trying to not honor it up to them. We stopped forcing them to honor it in 1876. Right. But we don't repeal the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Right. So this is sort of the compact that the entire country makes, this deal with the devil. We're going to let you guys down there in the old Confederacy in the South, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are not going to apply, and we're not going to force you to impose equality on your society. We're just going to ignore it, but we're not going to repeal those amendments. We're not going to go so far as to actually say what you're doing or acknowledge what you're doing. And the South goes along with that. I mean, there are debates in the South. Should we move for repeal of the 14th Amendment? No one really wants to go so far as to say we're going to repeal the 13th, although the convict laws pretty much give a clause that allows you to enslave people in the South. But the debates are about should we move to repeal the 14th Amendment, because clearly we believe in a caste society. We believe in white supremacy. There's no way we're going to let black people have any authority over white people in any way in the South. And they ultimately, these arguments always end up, no, it's better to just keep pretending that we're complying with it, because otherwise we might stir up old sentiment where people really see what we're doing and have to face it. So the rest of the country goes along with, okay, so long as you don't really shove it in our face, we're going to let you do it.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. They know they're full of shit. Everybody else knows they're full of shit, but there's an expediency to pretending that this thing is actually working.
Yeah, and the expediency is that, this is a playbook that's getting established that is going to be used in the rest of the country as well.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, from the very beginning, from 1876, Hayes, is very conscious of the fact that this is that Jim Crow is not just racial control; it's control of labor. I mean, that's an important theme, especially in the second half of the book, is that those things that are pioneered, the techniques that are perfected, the ideology that is imposed in the South, is applied not just to race but also to class.
Yes.
And that's that's why the elites in the North go along with it, right? And by the time we get to the Second Industrial Revolution, by the time we get hundreds of thousands of Catholic Irish coming into the country, and we get Catholic Germans coming into the country, that's when we start divvying up whiteness, right? It's no longer white, black. Now we've got to, we can't deny that Irish Catholics coming into the country are white. They're clearly white. But somehow we can't really let them have the vote and let them have control. They'll be taking over. And, New York becomes the cautionary tale. Look what happened in New York City.
Right.
The Irish took it over.
Yes.
That's going to happen in the whole country if we let them do that. So the anti-democratic movement in, 1870s, in the Gilded Age, becomes, you have to start demarking who really counts as white and who's just sort of, okay, they're white, but they're not really white.
You've got a chapter here called 40 Shades of White that lays that out pretty well. They're, again, very damning to the history of American anthropology, and rightly so. But since we are kind of broaching the subject of the Gilded Age, and I would like you to maybe bring in Thomas Dixon around now. He's such an important character in this book. Listeners of the show maybe don't recognize that name, but this is the author of The Klansman, which later became Birth of a Nation, which is we have talked about that on the show. But he's a very interesting guy, and I think he pulls together a lot of these themes. So maybe you could give us some of his story here.
Yeah, he's a really fascinating character, and I think anybody who does know who he is, they know him as the great villain of American literature, and rightly so. I mean, it's a very deserved reputation.
Yeah,
but he was a complex guy, and he didn't start out as the villain.
Yes, that's the crazy thing about his story, is that he starts on the, let's say, as close to the right side of history as somebody like him could have been at that time. But then, it becomes literally, a villain is the right word. I mean, comic bookish almost. Yeah,
he's born, and during the Civil War, he's born, and so he doesn't experience the antebellum South in any way, and he's in many ways representative of that generation of white Southerners. So the lore that he grows up on, the family stories, is going to be his parents telling him of the golden age, the Eden that was before the war, before the Yankees came down and stole it from us. Where slaves were all well treated and loved their masters, taking care of them. I mean, literally,
Gone with the Wind. Everybody knows it.
Yes, exactly. As a matter of fact, Gone with the Wind is just the retelling of the Klansman.
That's right. You draw that out in the book really nicely.
There's a direct through line between Thomas Dixon and Margaret Mitchell. So he grows up, in this world, but he's also, in the 1870s, 1880s, dissent is still allowed in the South. You still have other voices. So it's not like growing up in the 1840s or 1850s where you're getting absolutely brainwashed. There are competing ideologies, and there are ways for him to be sympathetic to a notion of equality that wouldn't have been available to him had he been born in 1840. I mean, the cards are still stacked against really becoming an enlightened liberal person growing up in the post-Reconstruction South, but it's possible. And he's actually he's a very bright guy. He tries his hand at various professions. He gets disgusted. He's a state legislature, and he gets disgusted with the way capitalists have come down to the South and have bought the legislature. He's really becomes a populist. He doesn't join the Populist Party, but that's really what his ideology is. And he gets more radicalized when he's a preacher in New York City and he's walking around and looking at the slums. So his populism really comes not from his sympathy with Black Southerners, but with European immigrants.
Yeah.
And he sees the dead end that these ghettos are. He sees that how the American economic system is not allowing them to pursue their happiness. It's robbing that right from them. And he talks about, a day of reckoning's coming where they're going to rise up and they're going to kill you because of what, the generations of misery and oppression that you visited upon the working class. And his sympathy for the working class spills over enough to sympathy. He recognizes that Black folks are half the working class in the South. And he doesn't quite come to condemn Jim Crow, but he does look forward to the day, he says sometime, in the future, people are going to be equal in the South. What we need to do, we need to educate this generation of Black people, but it's really hard because we're not even educating poor white people in the South yet. So, asking us to educate poor Black people is a very tall order, but he thinks it should be done. And within a generation or so, Black people will be lawyers and doctors. And, that's how he starts out. He describes himself as a liberal. Right. And he is, from the point of view of feminism, he's very much a liberal in, late 1880s, early 1890s. And then he starts switching. He starts backsliding. And the thing that really triggers it for him is the whole frenzy, the fever about Cuba and then the Spanish-American War.
Yes.
Yeah. And he falls into the old grooves because the rhetoric used in, to justify the establishment of this overseas empire is, of course, the white man's burden. I mean, that's the name of the poem that Rudyard Kipling publishes in McClure's magazine while the Senate is debating, should we claim the Philippines for ourselves or should we give it to the Filipinos? And the white man's burden is a poem saying, you fools, take up the white man's burden. The Filipinos are going to curse you, but that's what God wants you to do. You need to raise them out of the darkness. They cannot rule themselves. They do not have the right of self-determination right now because they're too primitive. And you, the great Anglo-Saxon, by this time it has become the Anglo-Saxon, not white. It's the Anglo-Saxon empire. Yeah. He falls into that rhetoric. He finds it really compelling, and strangely enough, this guy who was on the track to being this remarkable Southern liberal ends up writing first The Leopard Spots, which is that phrase is very potent in anthropological circles, as you know.
It's so fucking annoying. It haunts this discourse for so long.
Yeah. Can the leopard change his spots? And the answer to that rhetorical question, of course, the leopard cannot. Neither can the Ethiopian stop being black, right? Yeah, yeah. So he, the liberal view, the radical Republican view after the Civil War is, of course, uplift, right? We have to uplift this segment of the population that has been degraded for hundreds of years, and we have to give them the education. We have to give them the economic opportunity that is going to make them equal citizens and make them able to participate as full citizens in the democracy. And then the notion of the leopard spots is no, you cannot uplift Black people to the point where they are responsible enough to participate in the democracy. That if you give them power, they're going to abuse it because they're unruly, they're primitive, they're incapable of it. And he falls into that very dramatic. He really believes in the white man's burden, which becomes, his hero becomes Teddy Roosevelt. He helps, boost the Teddy Roosevelt myth that comes out of the Rough Riders, the book that Teddy Roosevelt writes after the war. So he votes Republican for the first time in his life. He talks about it in his autobiography, how difficult it was to do. He was afraid his father was going to, absolutely abuse him, because the notion of not voting Democrat as a white Southerner was like
voting for
cutting off your arm or something.
But you wrote it. Your commentary was really good on this. This is also a quote from you. That vote marked the North's capitulation to Southern nationalism, not the other way around, right? Dixon, you said, was voting for an empire of Jim Crow.
Yeah. And it's fascinating if you go back and read the contemporary accounts of what's going on in the Spanish-American War. You read the speeches of Teddy Roosevelt, for example. You read the newspaper accounts. What is really significant about the Spanish-American War, to people who went through it, is that this is the binding up of the wounds that had been, that had been split open in the Civil War. So the Spanish-American War is when you have white Southerners, white Northerners, and white Westerners fighting in the same unit. And the Rough Riders is the microcosm of that, right? Teddy Roosevelt talks about the Rough Riders that way, but everybody talks about the whole enterprise is finally now, through the crucible of war, white Southerners and white Northerners and white Westerners have become one people again, right? But they do that by embracing the white man's burden, which is white supremacy, which is the notion that the democracy only belongs to white people in this country. Yeah. And to deviate from that, to dissent from that in 1900 is to aid and abet the enemy. You are helping the Filipino rebels, right? The insurrectionists in the Philippines who are rebelling against their lawful government, which of course was established by the United States by buying the Philippines from Spain 6 months ago.
Yes, exactly.
The absurdity of calling the Filipino nationalists rebels, which is not lost on a lot of people. There's a huge anti-imperial league, and there's a lot of people fighting against this new narrative of American identity that comes out of the Spanish-American War, that we are an Anglo-Saxon empire. Nevertheless, the Anglo-Saxon empire prevails, and that's why when we get to 1915, in the first great blockbuster film that invented the feature film, the blockbuster, was D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, which is the film version of Thomas Dixon's The Klansman. So Thomas Dixon becomes the great propagandist of this new, well, I mean, not new, it's been around since 1820, as I'm arguing, but of this narrative of American identity.
And he starts it too, sorry, but he starts it from such like, he's such a dick. Like his first book, I forget the name of it, I'm sorry, but it was written in response to Uncle Tom's Cabin, right? And it sucked. Yeah. It was like a shit book.
Yeah, that was The Leopard Spots.
That's The Leopard Spots, that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that book culminates, the climactic moment of that book is the Wilmington riot.
Yes, I was going to ask you to draw that out for us when you're ready in the narrative here, but yeah.
I guess we are. So let me go into that. So I mean, in North Carolina, so as I said, he was almost a populist. There was the populist movement, of course, in the Gilded Age has got a lot of different. It's a big tent. And part of that tent in the South is, the dispossessed tenant farmers, those plain folk of the Old South, who under what is called the New South are not prospering at all. As a matter of fact, they're destitute. They're a white proletariat, and this, of course, this is the ethnically, these are the Scots-Irish who are used to be small farmers and yeoman farmers, they call them, and now they're living in the towns, and they're working in textile mills and cigar factories and things like that. They recognize, at least the populists recognize, a opportunity for solidarity with the Black working class in the South. They have common cause, right? And the real enemy are the factory owners, the railroads, the corporations, the timber companies that have come down to the South, who are exploiting both the poor white and the poor Black together. So there is a movement that is trying to undermine the narrative of white supremacy and Black inferiority, and actually
through class consciousness.
Through class consciousness, and it succeeds in North Carolina. So that, in the mid 1890s, a coalition of Black Republicans and populists, white populists, sweep the state legislature, the elections. It is this is a working class uprising, really, and they rewrite the rules of the democracy to eliminate voter suppression, to reestablish the 14th and 15th Amendments in North Carolina. And that triggers, of course, a backlash, right? But it has started, the bordering southern states, Georgia is terrified of this, South Carolina is terrified that what's happening in North Carolina might spread to the rest of the South. So there's very much a concerted effort, and the effort, to overthrow this new, democratically elected government. And Wilmington, of course, is the most dramatic case, is because that's been sort of a little urban enclave for upwardly mobile Black folks for about a generation, to the degree that Jim Crow is maybe enforced a little less. In certain places in the South, it's going to be, it's going to be in neighborhoods in Memphis, it's going to be in Atlanta, it's going to be in Wilmington. There's certain cities where there's at least a degree of Jim Crow is loosened. So Wilmington becomes, the symbol of what's going on all across North Carolina. This coalition of white and Black people who have come together to elect people who are going to be representing the working class, and the emergent middle class. And the narrative that gets put down very self-consciously by telling a lie about Black men raping white women.
Yeah.
And what triggers it. This is an argument over lynch law, over extrajudicial violence in the Jim Crow South. There's a editor named Alexander Manley in Wilmington who is responding to a woman who's given a speech at an agricultural convention or something. It says, if we have to lynch 1,000 Black men a week in order to control their sexual urges, we should do it.
I marked that. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is typical rhetoric of, that's the biggest lie, right? That's sort of its main manifestation.
Right.
And as you said, this is the libidinal core that is so visceral. This is what motivates people to visit violence upon other people, right? If you want people to do horrible crimes against other people, get their sexual anxieties engaged in it. So Alexander Manley writes in his newspaper that this is lynch law is all based on a lie. If white women are having sex with Black men are not raping them. White women want to have sex with them. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing. I forget exactly.
That concept
in
also,
more delicate terms.
No, yeah. But this concept also didn't really. Either way, these white dudes down south were going to be enraged, emasculated, impotent, etc. I mean, it's almost worse if white women are choosing.
Oh, it is. That's the biggest offense. You see this in Madison Grant's The Passing of the Great Race. Right. His great fear is that white women are getting attracted to these primitives. Oh my God, we got to do something.
God, that guy sucks so much.
That anxiety is so. I mean, I have to say, every time you start digging into this fascist rhetoric, it always when you're going to hit upon the rock bottom of this sexual anxiety. It's going to be. It's almost never not there, and it is. I'm convinced it's the root of the grotesque violence that we see under Jim Crow. Is this libidinal impulse, as you say?
I mean, you make a strong case for it in the book. It's rare that there is a massacre that isn't inspired by at least some of that rhetoric. Like it's
right.
always present here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you go through every single one, Memphis, Atlanta, Wilmington,
Yeah.
Springfield, every single one of those pogroms, you're going to find it was triggered by somebody trumping up the notion that, this guy murdered a white man and raped his wife.
Yeah.
And it's always a lie. It's always a lie.
So in Wilmington, you get this cooperation between some of the most fashy elements in this moment. I wrote down a few of them. You mentioned a group calling themselves or being called the Secret Nine. There's also a group you mentioned quite a lot in the book that are called the Red Shirts, which is very interesting to me because that's a very fascist nomenclature for these groups. Yeah. It's black shirts, white shirts, silver shirts, and here we have the red shirts, and also joining with the light infantry here in Wilmington.
Right. Yeah. And of course, and it's tied to, folks who had been marshaled in order to be deployed in the Spanish-American War and actually didn't get to go. So it's tied in with the building of empire. I mean, essentially, what I'm arguing about Wilmington is we're building empire here at home as well.
Yeah,
I mean, it's imperial role. This is settler colonialism in Wilmington.
It's Aimé Césaire's argument, essentially. It's really clear here. He said, I mean, he was concerned with Europe. He said colonial procedures, applied in Europe, but it's exactly what's going on here.
Yeah. Hannah Arendt says the same thing. Yeah. The red shirts. Yeah. That connection is so obvious. It's amazing that people haven't made more of this, right? They, the Ku Klux Klan organizes effectively in 1870, 71 in order to influence the 1872 election. And Congress mobilizes, writes the KKK acts, versions of which, those are essentially the same acts that were used to get so many of the convictions of the January 6th insurrectionists in our day, these same laws. And President Grant sends the army down. He declares several counties in the foothills of South Carolina to be in a state of insurrection. They come down and start arresting all the Klan's members, and they put them on trial. They can't try them up in the foothills because vigilante violence would prevent a fair trial.
Right.
So they bring them down to Columbia. They bring them down to Charleston. We have that same sort of rural-urban divide, in American culture. But they get convictions. They're sending people to prison, Klansmen to prison for the terrorism that they have perpetrated in order to influence the 1872 election. And there's many more who are on trial. That the Department of Justice was essentially created in order to do these prosecutions because there's so many of them that it's overwhelming to the Attorney General's office. So they develop an entire department to prosecute the Klan. Grant gets elected, and immediately after his election, he thinks, okay, now I've won, and he starts he starts losing his resolve. I mean, that's one way to put it. He would put it, I think, he starts trying to offer an olive leaf to the people he thinks he's now defeated. So he pardons those who are in prison. He sacks his attorney general, puts a new attorney general in there, and they suspend the prosecutions. I mean, not parallels. Yeah, this is a precursor to what's going on today, yes. Right? In the Department of Justice. And so the 1872 election, that was the first really sort of relatively free and fair election where Black people could vote in the South and in any great numbers. And Grant wins, I think it was 8 states of the Confederacy. And then, but of course the forces of inequality are relentless. And they start figuring out how can we accomplish what we want to accomplish without the direct confrontation of the Klan. So they just sort of reorganize, not on a national level, but on a state by state level. And in the Carolinas, they're the Red Shirts. They're the White League. In Louisiana, they're going to be rifle clubs and things like this. They're under various garbs, but they're essentially a private army of the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party is based on the ideology of inequality. So in 1876, the Reign of Terror comes back. And the 1876 election is stolen on account of it. They murder and torture Black voters. They have in South Carolina, they have the Red Shirts have orders to go to the polling place, and this wonderful tiny detail of these orders says, bring your dinner with you because we want you to stay there all day. And their
Yeah.
job is to intimidate any black people that come and try to persuade them one way or the other. You can buy their vote or you can threaten them. But if anybody actually votes, kill them. That's what the orders are.
Yeah.
So there's horrible violence. Hundreds of black people are killed in the Carolinas before the 1876 election. The most notorious case is in this small town in the Midlands, where a guy named who comes to be named Pitchfork Ben Tillman is a member of this. Where there's a black militia. I mean, they're in the uniform of the South Carolina militia, carrying, shouldering their weapons and marching on the 4th of July. And this is such an affront to the white folks that, there's a confrontation, it escalates, it ends up with a pogrom, in this small town. And Ben Tillman brags about this later on. The sight of 6 dead black men in the streets had a certain effect. And he uses the word terror. We meant to terrorize them, and it worked. So that becomes, that's the playbook of the red shirts. They are absolutely the precursor of the black shirts and the brown shirts,
et cetera, et cetera. I mean,
yes, et cetera, et cetera. This is you intimidate people with the vote. I mean, this is what makes me very scared today. What is ICE going to be doing?
Oh yeah,
on election day.
Yeah,
this fall.
Yeah,
right. This is not really a group who is serving the people of the United States. This is an armed group that is serving Donald Trump.
And right? Just like then, we have plenty of high-minded, supposedly liberal progressive types that are willing to make compromises to keep the machine running. I feel you can't not feel that throughout the book. Yeah.
Oh yes, and the compromising, because there's always there's some interest, and those people are a little too radical. I'm a little scared of that, you know.
Or we just assume our ideas are so good that someday they'll just win on their own. That kind of
there's
laziness
that sort of willingness. And that's what I think the story of what I'm building up to it. The book ends pretty much on a pretty much of a downer. Things are not great in the United States in 1915. But we have begun to put in place the mechanisms that are going to defeat this, or going to fight back effectively. So, the story of how the NAACP gets founded, is fascinating. And watching W.E.B. Du Bois educate white liberals, is a really fascinating story, because of course they need that a lot. Allies, you need rich white people who are going to bankroll this, whose heart is in the right place, but they're afraid of really radical things. And if your enemies, tell you that W.E. Du Bois is a communist or something, then you're going to get scared of associating with them. But yet that has to be overcome, right? Those fears have to be overcome. So the story of how white liberals actually join this fight, the fight that they were leading in 1860s, and then sort of abandoned, but then take it up again in the early 20th century. The ACLU, I don't tell this story in the book, but the founding of the ACLU, largely by New York Jewish lawyers. I mean, it's these marginalized groups who are going to be leading the way for white Anglo-Saxon Protestant liberals to get on board, and those white liberals are going to be educated and influenced by these really very brave and heroic intellectuals of the marginalized.
I think there's also a lesson there. We've already mentioned it, but something that is often forgotten is that I want to expand this also outside of liberalism, because that's what we do here. But it's also true that socialist, radical socialist, anarchist organizing, even in the U.S., these things came from below, and they set the models that now people use and have forgotten a lot of these origins. And I think one of the big lessons here that kind of you put in the end of the book, and I'm paraphrasing here, but the idea is that more or less that whether radical or reformer, it was black intellectuals, black activists that were the first to see the similarities between Americanism and European fascism. They called it early, they called it quickly, and they were right.
Yeah.
obviously.
Yes.
I think that's a really important lesson to take out of this too.
Yeah, I think people. I mean, not that we didn't know this, but people like myself. I'm Irish Catholic, but Irish Catholics have been
Sorry, are you also from
anglicized.
Texas? Are you from Texas originally?
Yeah, I am.
Are we
my
both
family
fucking
is-
Irish Catholics from Texas?
We could be.
That's crazy.
My family is really Bronx Irish. We moved down to Texas when I was in high school, so I consider myself a Texan living in South Carolina.
Very
Yeah.
similar backgrounds, you and me. That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, we could talk more about that maybe off the program. Or
Sorry,
something.
but go on. The Irish
yeah.
Catholic angle, yeah.
Yeah. So for somebody like me, I mean, you start what we're seeing happen now. I think is the eyes open of white folks in the country who are thinking like, wait a minute, white people are getting shot for protesting, right? I mean, they're exercising their right as a full American citizen to go on the street and protest what's going on, and they're getting murdered by federal agents who are then not prosecuted, get away with it, and we are going, oh my God, what an outrage! But of course, marginalized populations have been dealing with this forever.
Yes,
right? We are now right. Oh, wait a minute, the way you treat undocumented workers in this country is how you're treating me. So now we are recognizing these fascistic elements. What do you call it? These fashy things, right?
Yeah.
But they've been with us. They've been with us. I mean, why have we had millions and millions of working class people in this country who we refuse to give legal status to? It's because we can do whatever we want to them. We don't. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are suspended for that population of people.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Right?
Yeah.
So. And now we're just, when you start murdering white people, then I think the recognition of how dangerous this element in American society, that gets mainstreamed, right? And I think that's what we're seeing happen right now. I'm very much an optimist, so I hope I'm not.
Somebody's got to be, Joe.
Someone's got. But I mean, it just to the degree that anybody can, Well, first of all, is there a zeitgeist of the nation? Is there a soul to the country? But if there is, and if I can put my finger on that pulse, it to use another metaphor, the pendulum seems to be swinging back. So I'm very hopeful, but the pendulum doesn't swing back on its own. The pendulum swings back because thousands and thousands of people do the work of stopping the moment of inertia, stopping, the impulse that is going against, and pushing back and demanding to tell the truth, because we have the truth on our side, and that's what I think you're to the left of me. I would describe myself as a pretty a leftist liberal. I don't think you'd put liberal on your probably a bad word for you. Yes, yeah. And I understand the baggage that goes along with that word. But it takes this coalition, I think, working really hard. It takes people doing podcasts. It takes people in journalism. It takes people in academia. It takes, it's not just the most prominent celebrities. It's the hard work done by the foot soldiers, and I think we're in that crowd. I would place the two of us in that group, and through that work, I think we end up changing that moment of inertia and sending it in the other direction, so it starts getting momentum of its own and builds. And as I said, it builds very quickly and well, I think, because we have truth on our side.
I think I must agree with you on that. I think it's very clear at this point who the enemy is. But I think one of the lessons from your book that I would very much like, this is more for liberals, really. I think on like the revolutionary left or the anarchists and the socialists, et cetera, these are this is part of canon for us. But like this book shows that if you give these people an inch, they will stretch it across the entire country. You cannot compromise with fascism.
Right.
And it really bothers me to see that it doesn't surprise me, but I think it's scary how willing a lot of the old now we're talking about Democrats like we used to talk about Republicans, of course, but this Democratic elite today is willing to capitulate to those forces.
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, it's the people that are going to be able to stop that.
Yes. Obviously we lost faith in any kind of real patriotism in the Republican Party a long time ago, certainly after 2020, right? The insurrection of 2021 and their failure there. Mainstream Democratic politicians as well. I think this is wonderful, this grassroots upspringing that's coming up through the Democratic Party. There's old politics are done. There's the notion that you can get this cobbled together, half-assed thing called Obamacare and claim a victory. Those days are over. And
yes,
and I think people under 40 are not going to put up with that anymore. Which is really, I'm in my 60s now, so I love what I see young people doing today, and I think what Trump has done is he's opened up the possibility that we can really make radical change in this country now, because we've recognized that the norms, we don't have to, we can violate those norms and we can establish new norms. Now, of course, we want to establish norms that are going to be based on telling the truth, not telling lies.
Right.
But what is possible now that was not possible 10 years ago?
That wasn't.
Yeah. I mean, if Democrats sweep into power and they do not establish universal health care on way better terms, on terms that social democrats have in Europe, then I'm going to be surprised. I mean, I think.
Well,
I don't think we're going to. Those kind of compromises aren't going to be allowed anymore, I don't think.
Well, Joe, we're sadly out of time here, and that's a really good place to end it. There is so much more that we could talk about in your writing here. I highly recommend, regardless of whether you find yourself on more of like the liberal sides of anti-fascism or the socialist, anarchist, communist sides of it, this book gives you ammo, and it's worth having, it's worth reading, it's worth knowing these stories. And Joe, I guess we'll see. Well, maybe we'll have you back on, right? Let's see what they do. Let's see what they do after the elections, and we can have a chat about it or something, because it is up in the air, and I think I think we've got our eye on the prize here, at least.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're gonna leave it there. Thank you so much, Joe. And the book again, The Biggest Lie, it just came out hot off the presses. Definitely get yourself a copy, and that is again from Bloomsbury Press. This has been The State Between Us. I'm Fritz McLinden, and if you liked this episode, please check out patreon.com/The State Between Us for more of this. Honestly, we this is our wheelhouse. So thank you, Joe, for helping push it forward.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun.
All right, later.
Well, airplanes flying across the land and the sea. Everybody flying but a Negro like me. Uncle Sam says, your place is on the ground. When I fly my airplanes, don't want no Negro round. The same thing for the Navy when ships go to sea. All they got is a mess boy's job for me. Uncle Sam says, keep on your apron, son. You know I ain't gonna let you shoot my big Navy gun. Got my long government letters, my time to go. When I got to the army, found the same old Jim Crow. Uncle Sam says, 2 camps were black and white.